Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam. Good morning. Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Today is Wednesday, May 10th, 2023, and you are here for the May edition of Waterfront Wednesdays. Shout out to the Boston Waterfront Coalition for being the sponsor of today's segment. They've been with us since February, and we've been talking about their work in making sure that, one, we're aware of the waterfront. 41, some say 44. For there's an interesting number around the miles around Boston's waterfront. But we are here today with a good friend and brother who is a supportive partner of the Waterfront Coalition. He is a member of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. I will say this before he gets on camera because he's a little fair skinned like me, so I don't want him to turn red. But I remember this young man, seeing him around Elizabeth Warren. Then I would see him in our travels going home on the wonderful, always on time trolley in Mattapan. And just to see him progress, have the influence that he has in the area of politics and improvement of the quality of life around equity, especially now. And he's moving more in the space of economics, which is very important. And that's why he's here with us today as a partner of the Boston Waterfront Coalition. And he's also a fellow commissioner of the Black Men and Boys Commission here in the city of Boston, recently appointed by Mayor Wu. And he has also a couple of other appointments and things that he's doing. So he'll get me for talking about him like this, but I think it's important to raise that there are Black men out here doing wonderful things, Black men that walk on the waterfront. And so I would like to introduce to some and present to others my good friend and brother, fellow commissioner, policy advisor and lead at BECMA, advisor to Elizabeth Warren, and some others, Mr. Darian Johnson.
Good morning. Good morning, Jimmy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on this. And I think you mentioned too as well that you've seen me start when I first started in politics, in from the professional world to now, and it's been just a great friendship, a brotherhood too. You've always looked out for me, and then also give you a shout out too for being one of the most influential Bostonians. First and foremost, you do so much work for the community to keep us up to date with what's happening. And I know my parents tune in, and they always asking me about, like, how do you know him? And long story short, but it's really special to be able to share, this experience with you as somebody who's worked with you, but also looks up to you as well. So thank you.
Oh, brother, I appreciate it. And I'm going to get you because we've talked before, folks, guests come in to get ready before the show, and he didn't mention anything about his parents. So that's all right, Darian. At some point in this show, I'm going to get you back. But tell us a little bit about yourself, and you can lead to how you landed at BECMA, and then we'll go into the partnership. Shout out to Nicole, our wonderful executive leader there at BECMA. But tell us a little bit about your journey, Darian. Folks, first time on the show, I like to get folks to introduce themselves to the audience so they know them a little bit, because you definitely will be back. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm excited. Yeah, I'm excited to definitely share that. So I was born in Boston, right near Ashmont Station, and then I always say I'm a city suburb kid, so like a hybrid. So okay. I ended up moving to the suburb Milton, and I went to elementary school, middle school, high school, and then eventually I went to college in New York City. I think that was really important for me just for growth and development. You know, seeing New York is such a diverse area, and like I lived in Jamaica, Queens for a long time, and so I was really able to experience all that was diversity, from the Italians, from you name it. I just learned. I was just so indulged in the communities that I was a part of, and it was just. I really take that back, and I think that really changed my trajectory and just how I just navigate my everyday life. And for me, I always say I was a custodian first. I was a custodian since I was 14, and when I came back, when I came back from college, I did some custodian work. And for me, I loved service, and I learned in that experience that um, no job is too big or too small because every part, I loved watching the kids come into class and go like, "Mom, Dad, I have a new classroom. It's so clean." And so that was really, an impactful moment in my career, and that just loved seeing people smile. And um, I worked a little bit in the courts, worked in the court system, Dorchester District Court. I worked with youth that were dealing with substance use disorder, and those moments like that really changed my viewpoint. I just had a feeling in my heart that I need to serve people. And the economic part of my career, I worked in a little bit of finance for a little bit. I worked at KPMG. I worked in private equity at State Street.
Look. We're not in the finance world. KPMG, please break that down.
KPMG is one of the big four accounting firms, and so you have the others like EY, Ernest and Young, and Deloitte. I knew personally that I loved the experience, but I just felt like my work was always tied to community, and most people knew me from the volunteer work. I was at the Reggie Lewis Center. I was in Dorchester. I was always around, just doing, getting my hands and using my time that I had to volunteer because I had all this time. So I was just like, let me just go and serve. And then during my time in State Street, I got an email from the Congress, Senator Warren's office, saying, "Hey, would you like to do an interview for our office?" I never applied. My dad put my resume in the State House, and the rest was history. And I interviewed for 3 months, and I ended up becoming working with Senator Warren for almost 5 years.
Yep.
And in that 5 years, I've learned so much. I was able to work for somebody that really changed, I think my trajectory in life, but also taught me how to be a professional and also how to walk in these. I think being in these spaces as a Black man, I learned the gravity and the power that I did have with all these experiences from her travels to the presidential, which I was on. That's how even ultimately how I would met Anthony Davis, who's like,
shout out to that good brother who's a part of the coalition.
Who's part of the coalition, who is one of my closest friends. Like we talk every day. I might annoy him too from time to time, but I know he understands. But but my biggest thing for coming to Beckma, and just to leave it at this, was I wanted to give back all these experiences that I had from working in high level government. And I've always felt like I never got to see myself in government. I was always like, where are there black men that are doing this work?
Yes.
And, my barbershop that's in Hyde Park, they would always say like, oh, government, they always saw government from an approach of how it didn't help them or service them.
Yeah.
Said like, when I was reflecting during the time in the Senate, I said, who could I be that person, or could I be one of those people to help shape it, especially as somebody who, has come up in this rank. That's all I've all I really knew professionally.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like Beckma wasn't it was a place for me to allow myself to really work 24/7 on the mission of closing the racial wealth gap and supporting Black people across the state of Massachusetts. And it just tied closely to my heart and my spirit. And it doesn't even feel like work. It just feels like an extension of what I already was doing and was already going the direction I was already heading.
Darian, is interesting. I've known you for years, but did not know that servitude part. And so that's two paybacks that I owe you, either this show or somewhere later, because the reason I do that for folks' initial appearance when I know they're going to be back is I like the community to know exactly what you share, that you come from a place of servitude. A lot of people, I did an interview with Janae this weekend, and she made the notion of, for some, it appears that these things happened overnight. Folks like us got history, and you were very intentional about naming that you were a custodian since 14 years old, and just so that is definitely good to know as a foundation of your servitude to Beckma, which lends to your contributions to being part of the partnership of the waterfront. And I'm going to kind of take this a little a different flow. You talked about Black men being visible in government, and there's a mental health impact to that. And we're going to talk about the economics, but we can't move in economics and we can't do things if we're not addressing and keeping ourselves mentally well. So can you talk to us about how all that you've accomplished leading to being part of the coalition, what do you see from a mental health standpoint from the waterfront? How does that public health and wellness, let's start there and then go into the economics, because if that part is straight, you're a little more inclined and it's easier to participate in the economy around the waterfront.
You know, Jimmy, I think one of the experiences I had, and I want to talk about this too, because I think the reason why I thought the Coalition for Resilient Inclusive Waterfront was so special was that it was one of the when I was in government, I had an experience when I was Senator Warren in Weymouth. There was an issue called the Weymouth Compressor Station, and there was a community that was there in Weymouth that had, they had a high levels of, like, they get cancer, and part of the reason why was exposure to gas, right? Gas and one of the things that I saw in those communities, like in that community in particular, just walking through it and talking to folks, was that because their communities weren't safe, they were always at a high level of anxiety because they felt like their children's livelihood was going to, maybe if they weren't around, their grandparents weren't around to see it in 20 or 30 years, they would have, underlying health issues that would affect their growth. And some of these folks are they're not going to move from their community. They're going to stay there, and they're going to have these, these underlying diseases that would affect their families. And I learned right then and there that if your community isn't safe, and safe doesn't just mean violence, it also means healthy, environmental, like is your community being taken care of? Are there cleanups? Do you have the folks that are advocating for you to make sure that you feel safe when you go to sleep, knowing that my son or my kid's not going to be exposed to these chemicals or diseases? It's really important that that's what made me get into this fight initially. I've always kind of been involved in environment, but I really took the onus to really share this experience that I had and bring it into BECMA too, because I know that, and you know this too, that the waterway is a connector. And you talk about the waterways here, they connect all the 23 neighborhoods in the city of Boston. And that connection also is, some folks do walks. Some people, it's from a tourist attraction, they bring folks into the community, and some people really love to just wait. I know some of my friends walk in the morning every day as their first 45 to a minute to an hour, just to clear their mind and their head. There's something so special about even just seeing your reflection in the water.
Yes.
And seeing yourself and saying, like, today's a different day. And I really believe there is a relationship between how people view their environment and also how they feel. And so the fact that, and this, and this is something you preach about in the commission too, is just like your surroundings really, they say all the time, like, the people around you reflect who you are.
Yep.
But it's also too, there's the environment you surround yourself also reflects how you feel. And so I really do believe that we have to, the connection is ultimately just your well-being. And so how do we, and that's why this work, it was such an easy for us as an organization. And just, I knew individually to join into this coalition because I believe in wellness. I believe in other people's wellness, even if they don't see it. And that's part of what the coalition is doing now, is to bring these diverse voices and folks to this work, so they understand that they're informed and go, hey, like, wow, like, if we are being part of this catalyst of change for our community, it's going to make our lives better in the long term, even if we don't see it now. And that's the thing that is truly important for us to, ground ourselves in.
One of the things, Darian, that BECMA works on, and so does the coalition, is access, BECMA, access to the economy, access to boards, appointments, commissions, and things like that. And the commission works around ensuring that there's access to the waterfront. What is your viewpoint in being involved with this around, let's name a little bit, there are limitations to access. If you live in Mattapan, like it is, okay, let's say we met up on a trolley and we wanted to go, let's say, you know, I ain't got nothing to do today. Let's go down to the seaport or let's go to East Boston. It is interesting to get there. There's the physical access. What are your thoughts around access in general, and how do we improve access with balance that there is? And so I'm going to get into the accountability piece a little bit, because while we're fighting and advocating, when we get wins, we also have a level of taking the extra bus, making an investment in the time to go down and walk on the waterfront, to go to East Boston, to go to, you know, somewhere near the harbor. Let's talk a little bit about access and accountability.
Of that. I think the first thing that tends to be forgotten is that in this space, we talk about environmental justice and we talk about communities of color. I've always felt that the voices really weren't at the table. One of the things I was really proud to be on was the Governor Healy's transition team, particularly around climate and resiliency. And one of the things that I spoke the truth to power was, I said, how many of us are actually in the communities that are being impacted by, the changes that are happening within the climate? And, I think and a lot of folks stepped back and said, you know what, we've been the voices for those communities, but haven't been always in those communities. And, and I think the work that we did on that transition team, I think of Chief Mariama, who was there with me, Maria Belen Power, who's the undersecretary right now, in the Environment Justice Cabinet, really amazing woman, did really great work at Green Roots, giving her a shout out and a praise. But we really believed in intentionality, and you would be so surprised to see, in this work sometimes that folks advocate for communities that haven't been at the table, but do not have the experience of actually being in those communities to actually know the day to day. And for anybody who knows me really well, I know I'm a relatively quiet person in my personal life, but
Quiet storm. Let's keep it 100. Let me give you some flowers too. Powerful, quiet storm. Let's keep that.
And I appreciate that. I've been in every place. I've been across this whole state, and I've seen what climate looks like, what it means to the individual, but also regionally. And which is why I'm so excited. I really believe that accessibility also starts with what you said, accountability of having knowing folks saying, if we're going to advocate for something or a place that has never been at the table, you have to be there. You have to be actually in those communities, talking to the leaders, talking to the folks, knowing the issues. You can't just say, and I get really careful when I use this word, but like environmental justice communities, because I feel like that's a general, like, all right, it's environmental justice community, but like each community has their different issue
within their
community.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I'm not a talking point person, which is why I believed that when I was on the transition team, I said, we need to have folks, we need to create a office or some type of representation where environmental representatives from those communities are going to be at the table, which is why, there's going to be there's an environmental justice office that's going to be created, that is created in the governor's office. And I think that comes from a lot of the work of the people that are from those communities were able to uplift their voices in the discussion. So I think accessibility starts with is accountability, but also is what the Coalition for the Resilient Inclusive Waterfront is doing, right? There's 60 nonprofits, organizations in this coalition. And here's the thing that we're all grounded in, and that's what's is really important, is diversity of thoughts and who gets to actually say what are the issues. And that's why it's really an amazing ability when you have folks from different walks of life being able to say, you know what, I didn't even realize that. I didn't even realize my privilege and not even being able to see these issues.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's why we've been able to move, and we have the like data to show. We did a survey in 2021 to show some of the impacts and how communities of color see the waterfront. And so it's really about extending that hand and making voices who have never been there be able to say, hey, this is how my community is actually feeling about these issues. So
it is there's so much to unload there. And just what are the number of partners again?
60
partners, and that has grown because I've been involved with the commission for over a year now, and that has definitely grown. And the diversity you have from BECMA to Boston Wild Black, you have Boston Harbor now, you have organizations out in East Boston, you have I believe, and I want to say something, and I hope the coalition doesn't get me for this, but my understanding of how a lot of this got started was because a lot of people, you talked about privilege, and a lot of people that had privilege, I think had that sort of what we would call come to Jesus moment, and realized around the George Floyd period and even before that, that they recognized the privilege to be on the waterfront, to live there, to work there, to have property there, whatever. And you talked a little bit about intentionality. There was also intentionality to say, hey, we got to do something. And therefore we have, the Waterfront Coalition and things that have happened in between that realization and then till we have today. And so the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Darian, and I know you're able to speak to this, is as a community, when those inroads are made, we do, with the limitations, we do have to, as best as possible, with all that we deal with in life that comes with our individual and compiled and common marginalizations. I said before that we got to maybe think about taking the extra 20 minutes to get on the red line, to go on the silver line. Do you think it's worth the investment to be accountable to ourselves, to take advantage of what's made available to us, though in some cases limited? And I know that was a loaded question.
I think that
he's about to slay us, y'all. He does this in the meeting, and when he looks to the side, it's like the whole room is about to go.
I think about this because how did we meet? Times, some of our greatest conversations I think we had was us waiting for the trolley. Look, heated,
but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right. And look, I think that, public access to trolleys in MBTA, who uses it the most? Black and brown communities.
Yeah.
And I don't believe in the idea of, because it's there, you should be, you should be thankful, or you should use it. I also think there needs to be continual intentionality of making sure that it's working for us. I always say this, I used the T since I was 7 years old. And I remember, when I first came back when I had my first professional job, I'd wake up at like 6 a.m. and I would barely be getting into work at 8:30. I'm gonna pause that for a second. Let that hit a little bit.
Let's zoom.
And the crazier part about that, I used to tell my colleagues this, and they wouldn't believe me. They'd be like, some of my friends, not just my colleagues, but like people that I would see after work. They'd be like, Darren, you're just making that up. You didn't get up on time. And then those same colleagues, years later, when we started seeing some of the stuff that was happening with the MBTA, would call and be like, I am so sorry. I didn't even know that, because I had a car, so I didn't have to worry about that. And that's the thing. That's the level. It's the layers, right? Like, I didn't have a car and I had to use the T. And, it's really sad sometimes when it takes a fire, it takes a death for somebody to actually say, you know what, that actually, I see why maybe Darian had issues on the train.
Yep.
And it's like, that's because my lived experience has sometimes been excluded in the conversations around the environmental and the issues that it affects. And, Jimmy, I always say this, just because something's given to you doesn't mean it's great, and there are so many things we continue to do. I think one of the things that we did the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts that I was really proud of. Nicole and I really discussed and talked about was placement on the MBTA board. We're gonna talk about accountability. That's our bread and butter. And we're so excited to have like a member of ours placed on that commission. And one of the things that we also know, and Anthony, thank you for your comment too, is that we in here in the coalition, we understand that that's a continual process. And I think one of the things too is some folks have to use Uber and Lyfts and to get to work. And I don't know for everybody, and I'm not making the assumption, but that's coming out of their paycheck, right? And like if it's not reimbursable, that money, like you're losing your paycheck at the end of the week because it's not working for you. So although it is something that is accessible, first, imagine some people already hear from their family, their grandparents. It's like, oh, don't use the T. I'm not gonna lie. At times, I had to make the ultimate sacrifice. Like, I can't use the T today or I can't use it on Tuesday and Thursdays because I have to get to work, and there's a special event that's happening, and I can't be late. And I didn't have money back then. I didn't have the amount of money, the money to really be using the T and spending my Uber and Lyft $40-$50, and ultimately maybe close to $70 a day just to go back and forth. And it was a lot. And so I think I like where the state's going to, and the city is also doing, and also this coalition is doing, and saying, yes, this works. This train station works for Black and brown folks, but we got a long way to go if we're going to say equity is at the forefront, because people's livelihood, jobs, how they get to places is all centered around public transportation. And so, and it affects, and as I stated earlier, my lived experiences, people didn't even understand the fact that I was being late, or I could get close to being late on 2 hours on a train. So
that's a whole different, as we say, Zoom in itself, because transportation, and the point that you touched on and I was trying to bring out is, with those limitations, making that investment, we had to, it's a whole nother topic that I'll bring you back and talk about. But you did start to open up the conversation. I was intentional about talking about the mental health piece. You talked about a lot of your personal experience. Let's get into the economics of the waterfront. I understood, I believe it was last year, either at the summit or during the wellness week, that you spoke. And my understanding is that you slayed the people. They all fell out. They had to call an ambulance because they were just overwhelmed with the knowledge and the motivation. I'm messing. But what was the central message that you sent last year in reference to the equity, the economics, and the work of the waterfront, and things that were being highlighted during the week or during the summit?
For me, I think there's a couple parts, right? And I want to talk about, before like I get really into it, just understand the dynamic that is Boston. Like, Boston's a huge tourist attraction.
Yes.
And the center of that is its waterfront, right? You have the working ports, the Charleston Navy Yard, Castle Island, just to name a few.
Harbor Island.
Island, those are it's one of its economic, it's like Boston's economic, points, or like economic, it's one of the things that the city uses to, in the state, to bring in its money. And I always felt that, like you said, it's part of its accessibility. And my thing is, we did a survey, the coalition did a survey in 2021, and one of the things it said is, between Black and brown folks, 70% of those folks said that the waterfront is tied to economic opportunities. And that's one of the things that I talk about, is the restaurant industry. You have, you have construction. I think a lot of people don't realize that there's a lot of union jobs that are centered to the working ports, to a lot of the contracting. And I've always said that one of the issues is, when we talk about this space economically, is that it goes over our heads for communities of color all the time. And so one of the things that I was able, one of the big legislation that I worked on last year was the huge climate bill that happened in Massachusetts. And I'm not going to go into the nuance, but I want to talk about what role I played into that legislation was around equity.
Yes, sir.
And I wanted, like, when people say, I get this all the time because I talk to a lot of young folks all the time. I talked to my mom's class one time about this. They're like, they're like, oh, there's these big climate jobs. And people be like, what does that mean? Like, oh, we're hearing it, we see it, but how do we get into it?
That part.
Right. And when, and the thing is that happens time and time again. I really do believe this is like, we take one or two community partners to be the person to say, I'm going to bring, X amount of people into the rooms. And I really do believe that it's not a one or two person's responsibility. It's a collaborative. And I think that's like, what's the beauty about the coalition is that we have 60 organizations committed to diverse voices. And this space has historically excluded me and you.
Come, sir.
And the economic portion is, if you don't know the issues, or you don't know, like, if I live in for example, right? If I live in the Cape Islands and I want to do a job in Boston, there's kind of a disconnect, right? Like the traveling, right?
Yep.
And one of the things that one of the tours that I think Anthony and I went on once, one of the businesses talked about, like, there is somewhat of a transportation barrier at times for folks to get to some of these jobs.
Yep.
And it's like, in order for the economic to meet the moment, you have to look at the barriers of entry. And that's the one that really hit to folks. Like, how do I connect a job? How do I go from Boston, like you just said, Boston to Seaport is hard, right, to get to? How do I go to Boston to New Bedford for a job? Like, for example, if you're potentially in a young person
that wants to go into fishing or whatever. Yes.
I want to go to New Bedford, but I'm from Boston. Someone might say, well, go move over there. But that's an easy way. That's like a black and white look at it, right? It's like, what if I don't have the means to get all the way over there?
Yep.
So there's a huge connector. I've made it aware, and I've said it, and I'm not afraid to say it. Transportation's huge, and also I think that's an incredible barrier for folks. And then also there's a really informational component to this of how do we disseminate information to communities so they know what's going on. And I think the Healy administration understands that. I think the Mayor Wu's administration understands that if we're not, like, you see stuff with the Green New Deal and like the Boston Public Schools, you're seeing it at a young, you're seeing a different type of outreach that needs to be intentional in order for the economic portion to work.
Yep.
And then also, like, and I don't want to go too far, but you have these clean energy. You talk about offshore wind. You have all this stuff that's like being talked about, and folks are just like, "What's a wind turbine?" Like, they're at the beginning of understanding what offshore wind is.
I'm sorry, because you touched on something. They're at the beginning of the understanding, and that is that resonated with me because we have not arrived yet, but there is progress because of folks like you, the coalition, Anthony, and what folks are doing. And so I'm sorry, when you said that, it just resonated with me because we're at the beginning of the I don't want to say the awareness. Folks are becoming more aware. I'm sorry.
No, and you hit it. And I feel like sometimes, because we're at the beginning and everybody we have ambitious goals, right? The state has this 2050 goal of like decarbonization, and then Governor Haley has a 2030. There's kind of like a sense of urgency to get there, and I think one of the things that's kind of communities are worried about is that they're never going to get there, and we can't miss this moment of not having voices at the table, because if we do, there's no, like, I think we take more than just 2 steps back, and I'm afraid. I'm afraid of this. I think when people talk about emerging or innovative industries, which is what we're kind of talking about here, when it's emerging and innovative, we're already at like a disadvantage because we're still trying to figure out our footing in this space and how do we and organize our voices.
Yes.
And so, in order for economic benefits to our community to work, we gotta make sure that we have all the equitable information is being disseminated to us.
Yes.
If it's not, then we're not going to get there. What are the cities like, I think about cities and towns that have not been at the forefront. Like I think, I want to make sure Mattapan, Roxbury, Dorchester is at the voice. I also want Chelsea, an area like Chelsea to be in the table. I want
Yes.
East Boston, right? I want areas. Springfield. I want those areas that feel like they're not included in the everyday conversations of these to be there. And if they're not, then I think we're never going to, even like if, let's say, from a data standpoint, we meet the numbers. The numbers not going to tell the story of impact that of those communities are not included when they were talking about success metrics. So that's how I look at it, Jimmy.
There's so much more to unpack there in reference to when you talked about, there if you have a young person that wants to go into fishing, there's the balance of getting them to New Bedford or and we're talking somebody 18, 19 that would even be, considering being old enough to move. But then how do we also be intentional for Boston young people or anyone with companies that are right here down on the seaport, on the waterfront? And so there's that piece as well. And I know the coalition does have, some influence on policy, but these coalitions a lot of times are made up of people, the voices to whom you referred. And so I just really, the fact that there are 60 partners that are a part of this, and it's well diverse. I don't remember everyone that's on the list right now, but it is a well diverse list of partners and supporters. And so the thing I want to get ready to sort of talk to as we get ready to wrap up is, from your perspective, we are approaching an endemic. We didn't go into the economic impact of that right now in this space, but how important is it to be intentional about the public health and wellness awareness or use of or benefit of the waterfront from a public health and wellness perspective? And if you've had one, you talked about the personal impact on your professional experience out in Weymouth, but I would love to hear toward the end about a time that you made it to the waterfront and X, Y, and Z happened. What did it do for you? And so can you speak on a macro of the benefit of on our public health and wellness, and then maybe end with one time you can think about where the waterfront, any part of it, was beneficial to you personally as Darian?
I think you just had the answer. That really just, when you talk about public health, I just think of the young people.
Okay.
I really do. I really do. The way that I think right now, our relationship to the water, and I think the work that we're doing is going to impact the way our nieces, our nephews, our children, our cousins, the young people we mentor really view the relationship with the water. Like, if you don't see it as something that is important, like you talked about, like, personally, I'm not gonna lie, I've been around, my mom actually, she's from Trinidad. And I've been, her thing was always about me learning how to swim.
Hold on. Your mother's, I'm finding out a whole lot today. Just one word for you. Kuchala. We'll go ahead.
Yeah, I know you use that one. Use that on me. Use that on me before too. My mom was big on me learning how to swim. And so I was I used to swim in the YMCA. I was on a team for YMCA, and I was always around. But one of the waterways that I was always around was the Neponsit River.
Okay.
And for me, I used to go there as a kid. Like, I can remember it. My mom walking me on the sand. And, I always found the thing that my parents really, I didn't even know this until I reflected on it, was that the water for us was a sense of like a family outing.
Yeah.
And it meant so much to me. And I don't know if subconsciously that had an effect on the work I do now, but maybe it did, actually, because, like, I'm not surprised that, like, maybe, I'm part of this coalition and I'm doing this work, because the water has kind of been a central part of my life. Like my parents always had a pool in the backyard. Now the squirrels might have made a, like popped it, but look, I'm gonna be honest. I'm like everybody else. Like you get a pool in your backyard, someone's gonna put a hole in it. It's just the real reality of it. You're laughing, but it's the truth. I've always had a water around me, so I really had this like. I always felt the water was a getaway for me,
Yeah.
Even in my worst days. And so, personally, that's something. But from a public health standpoint, I want to get back to it. Is that I really believe that the way that we treat our waters is going to have an effect on our overall how long we live, right? I'm asthmatic. I think one of the things that I also talk about, I think I believe in decarbonization, because if your air isn't clean, or it's very hard for you to breathe clean air,
Yep.
you're going to be wheezing, which I've had some really serious bouts with asthma, and as I got older, one of the things I had to do was, my dad actually kind of knew about that too a little bit when I used to live in Boston, and part of it was smog. Smog's huge. I think that's a really big thing that people don't talk about.
Yep.
Is like, those traffic in the morning and all those cars being together at the same spot, those CO2 emissions are tough, man, in communities of color. And, Congressman Presley uses this, and I'm paraphrasing it, but like the life expectancy for folks here in the city of Boston and compared to Cambridge is dramatic.
Yep. Along that route, what is it? What is she? She took a bus ride from, I think it was Nubian at that time, Dudley Square, up to Harvard, and she talked about the lineup Mass Ave. The age just continued to keep dropping and dropping,
and
increasing when you go to Cambridge,
right? And so this public health is really comes down to how do we want to see the environment we live in look like 5 years from now, to a couple 30 days from now, 20 years from now. And I'm telling everybody here, like, whether that is cleaning up, recycling, the small things matter over time. I'm big on that. Really understanding that we all have a role to play in the world that we want to live in and see. And I'm also going to say too is that what I can do, and I'm even putting myself here to be accountable, is talking about it's organizations, coalitions like these that have Wellness Week coming in June, right?
Yeah.
We have, Anthony got me to do yoga. He was like, hey man, like, let's just do yoga. And Anthony's one of my like big people when it comes to, mental health, like you are. And he's always like, just try something new. And, having people that are able to step back and, pour into you because they know that this experience you could pour into somebody else matters. And so I'm always thinking about, I always say to people, I love to be 2 steps ahead. Yes, and the way I think about this is, what kind of world do we want to live in? And how do we want to get there? And how do we want to do that? And the way that and I'm hoping to those that are listening in now, this is the earth that we live in, and we're only here for a short amount of time. And, people talk about their individual impact, but what's that contribution that you want to make to the world to make it a better place? And I think that it starts with, how do we see our environment and how do we want to shape it? And, I want to say is I want to shape it to be a better place for my kids and my cousins that are coming up. And I want to make sure that they understand that it's so important to make sure that your water is clean, even your backyard, making sure there's not mold. Like, all these little contributions matter. And so I want to leave it at that.
It's interesting because in all throughout here, I heard one word, but it really stood out. The underline I heard was intentionality. The intentionality. And that's the thing I like about the coalition. There's intentionality around why we're doing this, why they work with of color media outlets, why they're intentional about partnering with BIPOC institutions and ensuring that the LGBTQ voice is represented and the young people are represented, and those that need to ensure that our waterways are ADA compliant so they can have access to, if you're in a wheelchair or whatever. And so the intentionality of all of this, I think, is key. It's on the macro level of what the coalition is doing, but I would be remiss and say that also we have to participate, even through fighting through a lot of the layers that you said that constantly, sir, bombarding us. There was this old adage or this old story that there was a goat that fell into a well, and the farmer had basically gave up that the goat was going to die, and the well was dried out. And see, he wanted to give him a proper burial, and he started throwing dirt into the well. Well, Darian, after about a little while of putting dirt in the well, the goat took and pat all the dirt, climbed up on it, and got out the well. So that's the example of, though this stuff fights us, we talk about goats and greatest of all time. We have to be determined within ourselves to fight up through the dirt. Speaking of a well and water, I didn't even know that there was a correlation there. So, I used to be a preacher back in the day. I tried to work that out. But no, Darian, I appreciate you on a number of levels, but I knew that today was going to be an authentic, mobilizing, and even folks that go and watch this after. I know that folks are watching now had a lot of thoughts. There's a lot of memories you caused folks to think about when they used to go fishing when they were younger, and they used to go to Castle Island and Houghton's Pond. I'm not going to let this get past that Anthony said it was beneficial, but he was sore for a week.
Oh, I was too. And, I want to add one thing like that I think we all heard, change can't wait.
Yes, sir.
So let's be the catalyst for that change that we want to see.
That's the accountability piece, sir, that the advocate, I'm getting this in real time. The advocates need the energy of those to whom Ayanna said this.
People most closest to the pain.
She said this, she said that. And also one day I told her that someone had referred to me as a voice for the voiceless. And she was like, they have voices. View yourself as a quote unquote, and I'll leave this alone and don't start a choir director. We're choir directors. That the different voice. Okay, get off my screen, Darian. This you starting to what you call it?
We can talk. I know we can go all day, but
listen,
thank you for
man,
creating a safe space, man. Thank you for Jimmy. Thank you for creating a safe space for me to come in and just share my share my experiences and my story. I've always said you are really truly a vessel for the change and for people like myself. And thank you for always being there and being a constant. It means a lot. And thank you for allowing me to be on your show. Thank you.
You think you're slick. You're gonna, that's three strikes and you're out. So that's all right, Darian. One way or another, I'm gonna pay you back.
I'm quiet. I'll work on it. I'm trying to be a little more, a little louder. And
I'm gonna get you, sir.
You call me.
I appreciate you, brother. Have a good day, man. And I'm gonna go pay some bills, and we'll see each other. We might see each other this evening or very soon. All right, brother. Good to see you, man. Listen, folks, that was the good brother Darian Johnson from the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, who is a supportive partner with the Coalition for an Inclusive and Resilient Waterfront. We're glad to have you in the room today to be with us to hear from Darian. Just want to remind you that coming up beginning, and they're going to get me for this, June, Jesus, I need to start having like show notes in front of me. June, that Saturday, that Friday. All right, let me back up. The 14th, the 15th, the 16th. June 16th or 17th starts the Waterfront Wellness Week. And as a part of that, Java with Jimmy will be on the waterfront for our for the Coalition signature event that is taking place. And so I don't have the flyer queued up for that, but that is starting on, I believe, June 17th. And then we're going all the way until June 21st, closing out with, and it's now been updated. It's the Java with Jimmy Community Day cookout and conversation. And so we're going from about 3:30 to 8. Family fun activities. Young people are going to be there. There's going to be a panel, food trucks. More details are coming. All right, that's it for me this morning. I also wanted to just remind you also that through a partnership with the Boston Lesbian Gay Urban Foundation and Fenway Community Health Center, they wanted to let Boston and surrounding communities know that BLUE, which is the acronym for the Boston Lesbian Gay Urban Foundation and Fenway Health, have come together to inform you how important it is to protect yourself from COVID-19. Listen, we are not completely out of the pandemic. I know as of tomorrow, the federal government and entities, they're lifting the emergency ban and vaccinations and stuff are going to go up. But we just wanted to let you know that these services are available to you. And we will post this information on the Java with Jimmy page. But if you need information about COVID, please make sure you check them out, especially if you're part of the LGBTQ plus community. As in a member, I am so happy that the coalition is intentional about those voices being heard as well. And so thank you for joining us today. Remember to save the date, 6/21/23. And I think that's it for me this morning. Don't forget the health fair taking place next Saturday. The health fair is next Saturday. So, and we got some wonderful things coming out for that. So don't remember May 20th. I don't remember. Lord have mercy. Don't forget Saturday, May 20th, 11 to 3 at the Delma Burns building. That is it for me today. Also stay tuned because I'm going to a meeting. We have some announcements about some in-person events that's happening. So again, remember, Waterfront Wellness Week starts on June 17th. There's a signature event on 6/21, Java with Jimmy, Community Day, cookout, and conversation. And we will be sure to share the website information on our page and Twitter as well. Thank you all for tuning in today, and we will see you tomorrow morning at 9. Now, listen, tomorrow I have the esteemed pleasure of welcoming an international filmmaker into our space. I met him some months ago when working with MGH, and he has a film out called The Death of My Two Fathers. And this young man, Darian, tapped into a little bit around the mental health and a little bit of the public health, but we're going to talk about health equity tomorrow. We're going to talk about grief. We're going to talk about men dealing with emotions. And so please plan to tune in tomorrow as I welcome into the Java Cafe Soul Guy, who is a filmmaker. And he will be with us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. All right. We'll see you then. Have a great day, everybody. And again, thanks to my guest, Darian Johnson of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. And thanks for the support and partnership with the Boston Waterfront Coalition. You all have a great day. We'll see you.